Today we're going to go through the reasons for the seasons. So we're going to be talking about why it is we have winter during a certain month and why it is summer during a different month. The essential question today is, why is North America warmer in June and colder in December? Why is it winter in the Southern Hemisphere when it is summer in the Northern Hemisphere? And we're going to describe the different seasonal patterns. These are those true or false questions again, where in class I would have you guys work, think, pair, and share together. But for these, you can just, listen. You can write them down on your notes if you want to as you fill them in. Number 3 states, long shadows are caused by the sun's rays getting longer. This happens during the summer season. So you would, in class, just write, true or false, and then explain why. And number 4, the shortest hours of daylight in the Northern Hemisphere happen on the winter solstice. Again, true or false, and explain why. Reasons for the seasons. So why is it that we have, different seasons here on Earth? It really doesn't have to do with the distance in terms of how far Earth is from the sun. So it actually has a lot to do with how Earth is tilted. And it's tilted on its axis. We learned that before. The actual tilt is 23.5 degrees. This is what causes our seasons. So the Northern and Southern Hemisphere, in terms of their seasons, are going to alternate. But overall, when we're tilting towards the sun, we're going to see that we're going to be in a warmer month, of course, because we're tilting towards the sun, and that's going to be our summer. And when we're tilting away, or the Northern Hemisphere is tilting away from the sun, it's going to be winter. The opposite's going to be true, and you'll see that on other slides, where when the Southern Hemisphere is experiencing summer, we're going to be experiencing winter. So we're always on the opposite season they are. But the big thing here is just to understand that the actual proximity of Earth to sun in its orbit really doesn't have that big of a difference in terms of seasonal changes. It really has everything to do with Earth and how it's tilted on its axis. This just goes over a picture and shows you Earth and its orbit and different seasonal changes. The ones I boxed in are the ones I'm talking about more often right now because we want to know more about the tilt and why it makes things warmer or colder. Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees, so we've already heard that. But the actual tilt itself is not going to change, so it's always at 23.5 degrees. But what will change is Earth relative to its position to the sun. So it will move, and it does get further and closer to the sun, but that's not, again, the reason why we have our seasons. How sunlight hits. So sunlight's going to hit directly and indirectly at certain locations. We learned that when we were going over climate. Sunlight hits Earth's surface most directly near the equator. And when we were going over climate, we learned that the equator is always really pretty warm, and that's because it's getting a lot of that direct sunlight year-round, where on the poles it's generally always cold. They're not seeing really much seasonal changes, and that's because they're always getting a lot of direct or indirect sunlight depending on the location. This just goes over an image and shows you that occurring. I put a line here to indicate, and I'll try to show you again here. Here we go. This is our equator, and you can see all that sun's just getting absorbed and hit right at the equator, where here it's going to bounce right off and you're going to get a lot less absorption of sunlight. This talks about in June. So for Earth in June, the Northern Hemisphere is experiencing summer. It's experiencing summer because we're tilted towards the sun. Fun fact though, we're actually furthest away in orbit from the sun at this point. So again, that just goes to show you that the actual distance from the sun doesn't have a lot to do with us getting warmer or colder. But the Northern Hemisphere is experiencing summer in June, and the Southern Hemisphere is experiencing winter. In terms of the shadows and the length of shadows, because in June we're getting more direct sunlight because we're tilting towards the sun, our shadows are going to be shorter. And for winter, because the Southern Hemisphere is always the opposite season that the Northern Hemisphere is experiencing, in June, the Southern Hemisphere is experiencing winter, and they're going to have longer shadows because they're getting indirect sunlight, and they'll also have shorter days. So winter, you're going to get a lot shorter days in terms of the length of sunlight, and in the Northern Hemisphere, because we're in summertime, our days will be a lot longer. So in December, the Southern Hemisphere receives most direct sunlight. So the Southern Hemisphere in December is experiencing summer, and the Northern Hemisphere is experiencing winter. Again, they're going to always be opposite of each other. Solstice. You need to know the definition of solstice and what seasons go with them. Solstice is when the sun is furthest north or south from the equator. This is going to be for our summer and winter seasons. Summer solstice occurs, and you actually need to know the date for the quiz. It occurs on June 21st each year. For the Northern Hemisphere, it's going to give us our longest day of sunlight hours, and for the Southern Hemisphere, they're going to have their shortest day. Those are the days that, it feels like it's still decently sunny at 8, 9 o'clock at night. We're getting a lot more sunlight and longer days. And for June 21st, it gives us our longest day. For our winter solstice, it's going to be on December 21st, so that makes it kind of easy because they're both 21st. But for our winter solstice, it's going to give us our shortest day, meaning we're going to have, not many hours of sunlight versus on our summer solstice. But for the Southern Hemisphere, they're going to get their longest day because, again, they're in summer. Equinox. So what is an equinox? Equinox means equal hours of day and nighttime. Equinox goes with spring and fall, and it's when the sun is directly above Earth's equator. During an equinox, day and night are about equal at 12 hours. Vernal equinox, you actually need to know that vernal means spring. Vernal equinox occurs on March 21st and marks the beginning of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. The autumn equinox occurs September 22nd, so think of that as our fall equinox, but you really want to know the name that goes with it. And that's going to mark the first day or the beginning of fall in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is our fun fact, and this is just because this is a pretty big misconception for many, that Earth is the farthest from the sun when it is summertime for the Northern Hemisphere. So when we're experiencing summer and it's really hot, we're actually, in terms of orbit, the furthest we can be from the sun. And again, the main reason it's that hot is because we're getting more of a direct hit from the sun's rays, and we're tilted towards the sun at that point. All right, this is the quiz time. So this is the time where it would be important to take note to these questions and their answers. This is a good, helpful way to study for your upcoming quiz on Friday. All right, number 1, what causes seasons on Earth? The answer is the Earth's tilted axis is changing, resulting in various seasons. So again, it's the tilt. That's the big thing you want to know. Number 2, in June, short shadows means it's summer. How does this occur? The answer is A. Earth's axis in the Northern Hemisphere is tilted towards the sun and has more hours of sun and more direct sunlight, creating those short shadows. And when you're, tilted away from the sun, think of it like a flashlight. You're kind of tilting the flashlight up a little bit. It's going to create an elongated shadow. Number 3, what season marks the shortest day in the Southern Hemisphere? And the answer is winter. And in terms of this question, I could also say what season marks the shortest day in the Northern Hemisphere? And the answer would be, again, winter. Again, when we're experiencing winter, Southern Hemisphere is experiencing summer. But in terms of this question, if I ever ask about the shortest day, it's always experienced both Northern and Southern Hemisphere during their winter. But for us, our winter's in December and their winter's in June. Number 4, vernal equinox in the Northern Hemisphere occurs when? And the answer is D, March 21st. So vernal meaning spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere is going to occur March 21st. What season is it in the Northern Hemisphere when the Southern Hemisphere is experiencing summer? And the answer is winter. Again, they always are going to have opposite seasons. These are those questions at the beginning that I just want to go through and answer for you really quick. These are the true or false statements. So number 3, it said short shadows are caused by the sun's rays getting longer. This happens during the winter season, and that's false. So it's false because, for winter are always going to have longer shadows because you're getting an indirect hit from sunlight, more at an angle. Your short shadows are always going to come from the summer seasons. Number 4, the shortest hours of daylight in the Northern Hemisphere happens on winter solstice, and that is true. This happens on December 21st, and it is the longest day of the year for the Southern Hemisphere and the shortest day for the Northern Hemisphere. All right, and that is it. Once you're done filling out your notes and you've listened to the whole lecture, you want to make sure to submit it. So it's an actual assignment that you need to submit, just like last week. And then you can move on to the next day, which is going to be where you're doing the activity. The activity, I recorded just some examples, some ideas as to how to complete that activity. You really don't need to make a foldable. It would be fine just to do it in Notability. A lot of people get a little confused about making riddles and what that means, but you're really just giving clues to each season and then also drawing a picture to go along with it, and then you're going to answer that clue. And then at the end, you have to just write about 3 to 5 sentences on that summary, and you'll be done. I hope you guys are all doing great, and I do miss seeing all of you guys in class, and if you guys have any questions about this PowerPoint, please let me know. Bye.